Seaplane pilot sees SOS on remote island. When he lands, his dog finds a stunning truth. They found Luke Marston half frozen at the edge of Elk Ridge, carrying a girl he'd met only through the terror in her voice. And a German shepherd bleeding from a gunshot meant for him. People kept asking how a quiet cowboy ended up saving a stranger's life in the middle of a blizzard. Luke always gave the same answer. It wasn't him. It was the dog who refused to turn back. And if you think that's the whole story, you're about to learn what really waited inside that stone hut, because some truths don't survive on their own. They need someone brave enough to hear them, and someone loyal enough to follow. The blizzard rolled in without mercy, a white wall swallowing the Wyoming plains mile by mile. Snow came sideways, driven by a wind sharp enough to cut through denim and hide. Out here, sound didn't travel. It was torn apart by the storm before it could reach the next fence post. But Luke Marston heard what mattered, the uneven clank of his horse's tack, the distant bawl of a lost cow swallowed by the wind, and the low, restless rumble from the German shepherd trotting at his stirrup. Ranger never made noise without reason. Luke leaned forward in the saddle, squinting through the blur of white. He was 40, but the years had carved deeper lines than his age deserved. The kind of lines that grew from a single moment that rewrote a man's life. He had lived alone ever since. Just him, a small ranch tucked into a forgotten valley, and the dog who refused to leave his side. "Easy, boy," he muttered, though the storm snatched the words away. Ranger didn't ease. His ears were pinned forward, tail stiff, breath steaming hard in the cold. He wasn't afraid. Luke had seen the dog-face coyotes, mountain lions, even a bull gone mean with fever. This wasn't fear. This was recognition, a sound, a scent, something the human world was too dull to pick up. When Ranger abruptly veered left, Luke's reins jerked with him. "Hey, what is it?" Ranger didn't look back. He shot through the drifts, chest plowing snow, moving with a purpose that turned Luke's stomach tight. Instinct had saved Luke more than he cared to admit, and Ranger's instincts were even sharper. Luke spurred his horse after him. The wind roared louder as they crested a rise. Snow blew so thick Luke could barely make out Ranger's silhouette. Then something darker appeared through the white, a shape where no shape should be. Luke pulled the horse to a slow, nervous halt. A stone structure hunched out of the storm, small and old. A single door made from weathered timber. No windows, no smoke from the chimney, no footprints. It didn't belong to any rancher or homesteader Luke knew. Most folks in these parts wouldn't build with stone even if they had the means. Too cold, too stubborn, too unnatural sitting out here in the middle of open country. But every rancher in Marston County knew one thing. That hut had been here longer than all of them. Ranger padded toward it, slow now, shoulders tight. His hackles lifted in a clean, hard line down his spine. A warning that didn't need translation. Luke's grip tightened on the saddle horn. The wind screamed across the plains behind him, pushing hard, demanding he take shelter. But even as the cold got into his bones, an older instinct whispered the opposite. Don't go in there. He slid off the horse anyway. Snow hit him like needles the moment his boots sank into the drift. Ranger pressed close to his leg, warm, tense, breathing fast. Luke reached out to steady him, but Ranger shifted forward, placing himself between Luke and the hut. "Something's wrong," Luke murmured, and though the storm swallowed his voice, Ranger understood. The dog's growl was almost inaudible, but Luke felt it through the soles of his boots, a vibration, a warning. He stepped closer. The stone walls were colder than the storm itself, like they held winter inside them, not just outside. Luke laid a hand on the door. It didn't give. It didn't rattle. It was shut tight. But something had brushed snow away near the bottom of the frame. fresh disturbance against untouched drifts. Someone's been here? The thought came with a hard twist in his chest. The last time he found someone in weather like this, it had cost him more than he'd ever been able to repay. Ranger nudged his leg, urging him back, but Luke reached down and brushed the dog's neck. "If someone's inside, we can't leave them?" The instant his fingers curled around the door latch, Ranger snapped. Not at Luke, at the door itself, a quick, sharp bark, loud enough to punch through the storm. Luke froze. Then came a sound he'd almost missed. A thud. Soft. Muffled. From the other side of the stone wall. Luke stepped back, heart hammering. Ranger moved forward, nose pressed to the narrow crack at the base of the door, inhaling hard. His whole body stiffened. Then he did something Luke had only ever seen twice in all the years they'd been together. He whined. Not scared. Not hurt, calling for attention, warning of life. Luke unholstered the small emergency hatchet he carried on every winter ride. He raised it towards the door, hesitating only a second. "Wait, listen." The storm raged. The horse stamped nervously behind him, but beneath it all was something else. Another thud, then a faint scrape. Someone's inside. Luke tightened his jaw. Ranger stepped back as Luke swung the hatchet into the old wood. The blade hit with a crack that vanished into the wind. He hit again, harder. Snow blew in swirls around him, the cold cutting deeper, but the wood began to split. One more hit. Something on the other side hit back. Luke stumbled, breath fogging the air. Ranger's bark tore through the storm, deeper this time, urgent, powerful. The door splintered. A gap opened. Warm air spilled out. And inside, illuminated by a single flicker of firelight, stood a figure Luke had never expected to see alive. But the shock that hit him wasn't from the person. It was from Ranger. The dog stepped forward, not with aggression but recognition. He lowered his head, tail stiff, ears pinned not in fear but in something sharper. He knew this person. Luke didn't, and that was the twist that made the storm feel suddenly much colder. He stared into the hut, at the shadowed figure staring back. Ranger took another step. Luke whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Who are you?" The figure finally spoke, voice hoarse, trembling. "I prayed someone would find me. But I never thought it'd be you, Luke Marston." Luke's breath stopped cold. He didn't know this voice. He didn't know this person. But they knew him. And Ranger's reaction said this wasn't luck. It was fate, clawing its way through the blizzard to find them. The storm hammered the stone hut as if trying to peel it apart. Snow hissed against the gaps in the rock. Wind clawed at the roof like some hungry thing pacing outside. Inside, the fire Luke built burned low, throwing a shaky orange glow across the uneven walls. The stranger who had spoken his name now lay wrapped in an old wool blanket Luke found in a corner, too weak to do much more than breathe. Whoever he was, exhaustion had dragged him under. But Luke couldn't sleep. He sat cross-legged near the fire, boots still on, shoulders stiff with cold and caution. Ranger lay at his side at first, pressed tight against him, his body warm, steady, familiar. Luke's fingers found the dog's fur without thinking. Slow strokes, the kind a man gives when he is trying to keep his own mind from unraveling. He didn't want to think about the past. Yet the smell of smoke and cold stone, the crackling fire, the trapped feeling of the tiny room, all pushed him into it. He saw his brother again. Eli, only 17, stubborn as a bull and twice as reckless. The snowstorm that night had come just as fast as this one. Cows scattered, a missing calf. Eli refusing to wait till morning. Luke had gone after him, cursing every step. He found Eli halfway down a ravine, the ice giving way under his boots. Luke had reached him, grabbed his wrist. But the ice had split beneath both of them, and Eli had slipped free for one blinding moment before disappearing into the white roar below. Luke had never climbed out of that ravine. Not really. He exhaled slowly, forcing the memory back into the place he had buried it for years. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Ranger lifted his head, watching Luke with eyes that saw far too much. "I'm all right, boy," Luke whispered. But even he didn't believe it. Ranger shifted, laying his chin on Luke's knee. A quiet weight, a grounding presence. The dog had arrived on Luke's porch 5 winters ago, ribs showing, paws bloody, eyes full of something haunted. They had recognized each other instantly. 2 lost things pretending to still be whole. Stranger in the blanket stirred, breaking the silence. His breathing hitched once, then fell back into a slow rhythm. Luke watched him closely. The man's face was gaunt, wind-burned, bruised. Stranger or not, something had nearly killed him out on that plain. Yet the way he'd spoken Luke's name held certainty, not surprise, as if he had been waiting for Luke specifically. That was the first twist Luke couldn't explain. Ranger's ears flicked. His muscles tightened under Luke's hand. "Easy," Luke whispered, but Ranger didn't ease. The dog rose without sound. He moved toward the back wall of the hut, every step controlled, deliberate. His body lowered, head angled forward, breath coming in slow, sharp pulls as he searched the air. Luke felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. The stone hut was small enough that any movement inside should have made a sound. But Ranger wasn't reacting to movement. He was reacting to something else, something Luke couldn't see or hear. Ranger stopped at the corner where 2 walls met, his nose almost touching the cold stone. Then his entire body stiffened. A low growl rolled out of him, deeper than any warning he'd given outside. Luke stood instantly. "What do you see?" No answer came, of course, but Ranger didn't look back. His growl vibrated through the floor. The storm outside pressed against the walls harder, as if it too was bracing for what the dog already sensed. Luke stepped closer, hatchet still in hand. Wind screamed through a crack above the door. The fire guttered. The stranger mumbled something in his sleep, shifting restlessly. But Luke barely registered it. Ranger's body trembled with alert, not fear. Luke pressed his palm to the stone wall. Nothing moved, but the cold radiating from that spot was different. Sharper, almost metallic, as if the stone itself wasn't solid. Luke leaned in. The wall breathed, just once, a faint cold exhale against his fingertips. Ranger barked, a sharp, explosive sound. The stranger jolted awake with a gasp, scrambling upright. "What happened? What's wrong?" Luke didn't answer. His eyes were on the wall, on the thin seam he hadn't noticed before, running from floor to ceiling, almost invisible beneath dust and shadow. Ranger stepped back, positioning himself between Luke and the stranger, muscles taut, eyes bright and unblinking. A guardian, fixed and immovable. Luke found his voice. "There's a door in this wall." The stranger's face drained of color. "You weren't supposed to find that." Luke turned slowly. "You know this place." The man swallowed, breath shallow. "I didn't think anyone would ever come here. I didn't think you'd be the one." Luke stared at him, confusion tightening into suspicion. "Why? Who are you?" The stranger opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a hollow thump echoed from behind the hidden wall. Ranger lunged at it, barking with a force that shook loose dust from the ceiling. "Someone's back there," Luke whispered. The stranger didn't deny it. The storm shrieked. The fire dimmed again. Ranger kept barking, louder now, urgent, fierce. Whatever hid behind that wall wasn't part of the storm. And it wasn't buried. It was waiting. Ranger was the first to move. Not toward the hidden wall this time, but toward the center of the hut, where the firelight barely reached. His nose skimmed the ground, tracing the stone inch by inch. Luke watched him circle once, twice, then stop abruptly. The dog's stance went rigid, his tail lowered, not in fear, but in sharp, laser focus. "What did you find?" Luke murmured, stepping closer. The floor looked normal at first glance, just rough grey stone scraped by weather and age. But Ranger pressed his paws into a faint line stretching across the surface. A thin groove, carved not by nature but by desperation. Luke knelt and brushed away the thin layer of dust. The groove widened, revealed as a dragged mark. Someone had been pulled. Hard. The stone still carried the story in its scars. Luke's breath hitched. No animal did this. Ranger lowered his head until his nose touched the groove. He inhaled deeply, then flinched, as if the scent itself struck him. He turned sharply toward the hidden wall again, letting out a single, sharp bark. Luke stared at the line, following it across the room. It led not toward the door, but toward that sealed seam of stone. The realization settled cold in his stomach. Whoever had been dragged had been taken behind that wall. Before he could react, his boot brushed something half buried in the slush near the door. A splash of color in the bleak room. He bent down and picked it up. A torn piece of red fabric. Thin, synthetic, from a winter jacket. A woman's size. The edge was frayed, as if ripped away during a struggle. Luke turned it over in his hand. Snowmelt dripped from the threads. Ranger barked again, pulling Luke's attention downward. The dog was pawing at the floor near the threshold, scraping away slush with rapid, urgent strokes. Luke dropped to a knee beside him. Under the wet snow, carved directly into the stone, were letters. Rough, jagged, carved with something dull, but unmistakable. SOS. Luke stared at it, throat tight. The letters were shallow but fresh. The white of the stone underneath had not yet faded. Someone had left it recently. Not days ago. Hours, maybe. Suddenly Luke felt the weight of the stranger behind him. The man had risen, blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, eyes fixed on the floor as if the letters were ghosts crawling out of the rock. "I told you," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to find any of this." Luke rose slowly, keeping Ranger between them. "You knew someone was here. That is why you were out in the storm." The man looked away, jaw trembling. "I tried to help her. I tried. But Reed... He didn't finish the sentence. His voice broke. Before Luke could press further, Ranger growled sharply and darted towards the back of the hut. His nose dug at a small crack in the stone wall, exactly where he had stood earlier. Something was hidden there, something small enough to be shoved into a crevice, but important enough for a desperate person to hide. Luke pressed his fingers into the crack and felt the corner of something soft, cloth-bound. He tugged gently. The object resisted. Ranger whined impatiently, pawing at the wall. "Come on!" Luke grasped harder and pulled. A small, waterlogged notebook slid free, its pages swollen and warped. He held it near the fire. The cover was blue, the kind schoolkids used, though half the color had washed away. Luke flipped it open cautiously. The ink was blurred, but a few lines remained. The handwriting was uneven, shaky, and the name at the top of the first legible page hit Luke like a blow. Emily Hart. Missing 10 days. He remembered the posters in town. The sheriff's truck parked outside the diner, asking questions nobody had answers for. Emily was 21. College kid. Came to Wyoming to photograph migrating elk. Then vanished. Luke turned the page. Ranger edged closer, resting his chin on Luke's knee again. The dog's eyes didn't leave the notebook. Luke read a surviving fragment aloud. "If anyone finds this..." "He took me from the ridge, said no one would hear me in the storm. Please, please." The words dissolved into ink stains. Luke swallowed hard, the firelight burning into his eyes. Emily had been here. She had carved the SOS. She had been dragged across this floor, and she had been taken behind that wall. Luke lifted his gaze to Ranger, who stared back with an intensity that hit deeper than any spoken word. They both felt it. She might still be alive. Ranger moved first. He padded back to the seam in the stone wall and sat directly in front of it, staring at Luke with unwavering certainty. Not a suggestion, a statement. Luke stepped toward the wall, pressing his palm flat against the cold stone. It felt wrong again. Too cold, too still, like the wall itself was holding its breath. Behind him, the stranger shifted. "You can't open that. You don't understand what's back there." Luke turned slowly. "Then tell me." The man hesitated, hands trembling at his sides. "Reed didn't just take her, he took others. He keeps them in the old storage tunnels under this hut. I tried to stop him. I failed. He locked me out here to die in the storm." Luke stared hard at him, weighing every word. Snow battered the hut. The fire cracked low. Ranger stood, ears forward, body taut, waiting. The stranger lifted his eyes finally. If she's still alive, she won't be for long. Luke didn't need more. Ranger stepped to the wall, pressed his paws against the seam, and barked once. Deep, commanding. Luke raised the hatchet. The storm howled outside, but the true danger was waiting behind the stone. The hidden wall would take time to break through. Time Luke feared they didn't have. The stranger was too weak to help, drifting in and out of, consciousness near the fire, mumbling apologies that made no sense. So Luke made a choice he hadn't made in years. He stepped back into the storm. Ranger followed instantly, pushing through the cracked door, chest low against the wind. Snow swallowed them whole. Luke's breath froze against his scarf. The cold bit deeper than before, as if the storm sensed he was chasing a truth it wanted buried. "Find her," Luke said, barely audible. Ranger didn't wait for permission. He lowered his nose to the snow and inhaled sharply. Emily's scent was faint after 10 days, but Ranger had locked onto something else too. Something stronger, fresher, human sweat. Blood. Pine resin. Someone had been here less than a day ago. The dog moved fast, forcing Luke to jog behind him. They circled the hut, snow climbing past their boots. Ranger suddenly stopped near a slab of rock hunched against the slope, half buried by the storm. At first glance it looked like debris. Then Luke saw it. Branches, stones, disguised intentionally, but done by someone in a hurry. Ranger pawed at the pile, growling low. Luke dropped to his knees and started clearing the rocks away. Beneath a layer of snow, a scrap of fabric emerged. Nylon, forest green, shredded in places. A backpack. Emily's likely. The zipper was broken. One strap was missing. Ranger pulled it free with his teeth, dragging it toward Luke. The bag was ripped down one side, exposing its contents. A small camera cracked across the screen, a field notebook with smeared ink, a map of the ridge half torn, and at the very bottom, stained dark brown, was a smear of dried blood. Luke's throat tightened. Ranger's body stiffened again. The dog pushed past him, nose working the air urgently. Snow kicked up from his paws as he moved toward a second disturbance at the edge of the slope. Luke followed and saw metal glint beneath the ice. A knife, not dropped, thrown, embedded in the ground at an angle that spoke of a struggle. Luke yanked it free. Blood crusted the handle where fingers had gripped it too tight. The storm hissed around them as he stared at the weapon, and something in the back of his mind cracked open. Another storm, another search, another trail. Years ago, he had held a knife like this while climbing down into a ravine. Eli's ravine. The memory surged up without warning. He saw his brother again, dangling off the ice shelf while Luke held onto his forearm. Snow pelting them, wind screaming past. Eli's voice, young and terrified. "Don't let go." Luke had promised he wouldn't. The ice had broken anyway, and he had spent every winter since trying to outrun that moment. Now, standing on another frozen slope, gripping another blood-stained knife, the past threatened to swallow him whole. His lungs locked, his vision tunneled. The storm roared louder, twisting into Eli's voice calling from the white abyss. Luke stumbled back a step. Ranger snapped at his boot. Not a bite, a command. "Focus." Luke blinked, hard, sucked in a breath he didn't know he'd lost, and looked down at the dog. Ranger's eyes were fierce, burning through the storm. He nudged Luke's leg again, harder this time, demanding. "You with me, boy?" Luke whispered. Ranger answered by turning towards the ridge, nose pressed to the snow. The dog inhaled long and deep, as if tasting the air for the truth hidden inside it. Then he bolted. Luke followed. Ranger cut across the slope with purpose, weaving between rock outcrops slick with ice, the wind carrying snowflakes like needles. Luke's boots slid on the steep grade, but Ranger moved as if gravity didn't apply to him. Nose down, muscles coiled, purpose unwavering. The dog halted suddenly at a cluster of fallen rocks, his growl vibrating against the ground. Luke stumbled to his side. The rocks hadn't fallen naturally. Someone had kicked them loose from the cliff above. Underneath, half buried in the drift, was another mark carved into the stone. Small, crooked, carved in panic. 3 shallow lines. The same 3 pieces of the S in the SOS inside the hut. Emily had been here, desperate, alive. Luke dropped to his knees, brushing snow aside with bare hands. He uncovered a partial footprint, smaller than a man's, forward dragging, someone pulling themselves, someone fighting. Ranger nudged the footprint and then glanced back toward the hut. The message was clear. She'd been taken back inside. Luke wiped snow from his face, drawing slow breaths as his thoughts steadied. Ranger pushed his head under Luke's arm, grounding him again. "Don't let history repeat." Ranger's eyes seemed to say it outright. Luke stood, the wind tearing at his coat. The storm was worsening. If Reed or anyone else was still out here, they could use the whiteout to move unseen. But Ranger had found what mattered most. Emily wasn't lost. Her trail hadn't gone cold. They still had time. Luke looked back toward the stone hut, barely a shadow through the storm. "Let's get her," he whispered. Ranger turned and charged through the snow, leading him back. The dog's tail was low, his body locked into the relentless drive of a search pattern. No hesitation, no fear, only purpose. Luke followed, the memory of his brother's voice fading behind him as Ranger pulled him into the present. This time, someone would be saved. The storm had carved the landscape into a maze of white ridges and dark shadows by the time Luke and Ranger reached the far side of the stone hut. The wind died down just enough for the world to sharpen into shape, revealing a narrow trail that disappeared behind a curtain of spruce branches. Ranger found it first, nose pressed to the snow, tail stiff as a board. Luke pushed branches aside and saw the trail drop into a shallow ravine protected from the worst of the wind. Snow hadn't piled up as deep here. Tracks remained visible, even under the thin veil of drifting flakes. Ranger sniffed deeply, his entire body locking into a rigid line of certainty. "You got something, boy." Ranger didn't look back. He stepped down the incline with deliberate care, following the prints. Luke knelt beside one of the indentations. The boot mark was deep, heavier than the stranger inside the hut. Someone big, someone strong. A second set walked beside it, stride uneven. And between those 2 trails, Luke saw the truth the storm hadn't erased. Drag marks, thin grooves, the same pattern he'd seen carved across the stone floor. Emily had been dragged down this trail. Luke stood, a cold anger rising inside him. The storm roared behind his ears, but Ranger's steady movement pulled him forward. They followed the tracks down into the ravine, weaving between boulders half buried in ice. Then Luke spotted something a tracker would have missed, if not for a lifetime of riding cattle ranges. Pine needles scattered across the trail. Out of place. Too fresh. Too green. Luke touched one with his glove. Resin stuck to the fabric. Someone had snapped branches and swept them across the snow, dragging them behind to blur the tracks. A crude but intentional attempt to erase their path. Whoever had done this wasn't new to the landscape. They knew exactly how to cover their trail in a blizzard. Luke's stomach tightened. The stranger in the hut had claimed he tried to save Emily. Maybe he had, but he wasn't the only man out here. And the second set of prints belonged to someone who didn't mind dragging a woman across a ravine in the dead of winter. Ranger suddenly froze. His ears twitched, head lifted, nose angled toward the jagged rocks beside the trail. He inhaled sharply, then a low, rolling growl broke from his chest. Luke grabbed the knife he'd taken earlier, though his fingers stiffened in the cold. Ranger stepped forward, paws silent against the snow, body low and ready. The dog wasn't guessing. He wasn't uncertain. He sensed something alive. Luke followed his line of sight. Between two boulders, where snow had collected into a pale pocket of stillness, a shadow twitched. A faint shiver of movement. Then a sound slipped through the wind. A soft breath. Human. Ranger lunged forward, barking with enough force to shake snow from the branches overhead. Luke jumped after him. Whoever hid there jerked upright. A man, bearded, gaunt, covered in frost, his coat torn, eyes wide with fear. He raised both hands shakily, as if expecting Ranger to tear into him. The dog stood his ground, barking once, loud and commanding, but did not attack. Luke leveled the knife toward the man. "Don't move." The man shook his head fiercely. "I wasn't going to, I swear it." Ranger growled again, pacing in front of Luke like a shield. Luke stepped closer. The man's boots matched the lighter set of tracks. The uneven stride, the dragged trail, the same scent Ranger had chased around the hut. This was one of the two men who had come through here. Luke's voice tightened. "You were dragging someone." The man swallowed, snowflakes clinging to his eyelashes. His lips cracked as he spoke. "He made me do it." "Reed, I didn't want to. I tried to stop him. He took her down the tunnel. I was supposed to cover the trail. I swear, I didn't want to be part of this." Luke didn't lower the knife. Blizzard wind tore through the ravine. "Tunnel," Luke repeated. "What tunnel?" The man pointed backward, toward the stone hut, hand trembling. "Under it. The tunnels were built decades ago for storing gear. Reed found them. He uses them now, uses them for people." Luke's heart hammered. Ranger let out a sharp bark, as if confirming the worst. There was more. The man flinched at the bark, raising his hands higher. "I didn't hurt the girl, I swear. I only covered the tracks. He said nobody would find her. Nobody would hear her." Luke took a step closer, knife still in his grip. "Tell me where Reed is." The man opened his mouth, but before he could answer, a crack split the air. Not thunder, a gunshot. Snow burst near the man's feet. He screamed and dropped to the ground. Ranger spun, barking furiously, teeth bared as another shot echoed across the ravine. Luke dove behind a rock, dragging the stranger with him. Up on the ridge, barely visible through the storm, a figure moved. Tall, broad, rifle aimed down. Reed. Ranger stood in front of Luke, body rigid, shielded against the direction of the gunfire. The storm swallowed sound, but not Ranger's growl. It echoed like something out of a darker world. Luke gripped the dog's fur, pulling him close. "Stay low." Another shot fired, ricocheting off rock. The stranger beside them sobbed into the snow. He followed us, Luke whispered. He's been watching. Ranger pressed his weight against Luke, steady and fierce. Luke's mind snapped into clarity. If Reed was watching the ravine, then he wasn't guarding the hut. Not now. This was their chance. Luke rose halfway, eyes locked on the ridge where Reed reloaded. He turned to Ranger. We go back. Now. Ranger dashed forward instantly, cutting through the snow with a speed no man could match. Luke grabbed the stranger by the collar and hauled him upright. Move! The storm swallowed them again as they raced back toward the stone hut. Behind them, Reed's shout carried faintly through the wind, furious and close. There was no doubt now. They were being hunted. The storm thinned as Luke and Ranger pushed through the last wall of spruce. What waited on the other side made Luke stop cold. A hunting cabin sat at the foot of the ridge, half buried in drifts, weather-beaten and leaning like it wanted to collapse. Windows fogged pale from the inside, and above the metal chimney pipe, smoke curled into the sky in a thin, wavering line. Someone was in there. Recently. Ranger locked onto it instantly. His nose shot up, nostrils flaring so sharply his whole body jerked. A deep, trembling growl swelled in his chest. Then he looked at Luke with an urgency that was more command than plea. Inside. Now. Luke crouched, pulling Jonas down with him. The trembling man kept whispering breathless apologies as they crawled behind a bank of snow. I told you, he muttered. I told you Reed brought her here. Luke didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the chimney. The smell of wood smoke meant heat. Heat meant someone trying to keep another person alive. Someone trying to keep a hostage from freezing. Someone trying to keep Emily breathing. Ranger moved first, slinking low across the drift, every muscle tight. Luke followed, boots sinking deep, heart thudding in pace with the storm. When they reached the side wall of the cabin, Ranger pressed his paws to the wood and sniffed under the gap. Then he whimpered sharply. Luke's stomach twisted. That wasn't fear. That was recognition. That was Ranger saying, "She's here." Luke shifted around the front porch, stepping carefully. Inside, muffled through the wood, came a faint voice. Please, someone. Please, Emily. Luke's chest caved in. Ranger scratched once at the door and looked up at him, amber eyes burning. Luke grabbed the handle. It didn't move. Locked. He took a step back, bracing his shoulder to break it open. A branch cracked behind them. Ranger spun, a savage bark ripping from him that shook ice off the roof. Luke whirled around, knife ready. Two figures stood at the tree line, half hidden in the twisting snow. The first was Reed, tall, broad, camo jacket stiff with ice, rifle in his hands. A face carved out of something cold and hollow, the kind of man who didn't see victims, only opportunities. The second man stood a few feet behind him. Jonas. But not the terrified version Luke had dragged out of the ravine. This Jonas stood straight, jaw tight, eyes rimmed red with something closer to shame than fear. His hands were empty, fingers trembling. He didn't look like a man ready to fight. He looked like a man ready to confess. Reed leveled his rifle. You should have flown right over this ridge, cowboy. Could have kept on chasing cows and ghosts. Luke didn't blink. Let her go. Reed smirked. She ain't dead. Yet, snow does a hell of a job preserving merchandise. Jonas flinched at that word. Luke saw it. Ranger saw it too. The dog slid in front of Luke, stance wide, teeth bared. Reed clicked off the safety. Move aside. I'll deal with you after I take care of loose ends. Jonas finally broke. No more, Reed. I'm done. Reed swung the rifle toward him. You're done when I say you're done. Jonas lifted his hands slowly. You told me nobody would get hurt. You dragged that girl across the ridge like she was nothing. I tried to stop you. You didn't give me a choice. Reed spat. You're the one dragged her. I just told you where. Jonas's voice cracked. because you were holding a gun to me." Luke watched the exchange, mind racing. Jonas was cracking open, and if he wasn't fully a monster, then he was a potential ally. But the wrong move and Reed would paint the snow red with all of them. Ranger growled low, inching forward. Reed shifted his aim. He noticed. "A dog, huh? You gonna sick him on me, cowboy?" Luke's voice stayed calm. "I don't need to sick him on you. He already hates your scent." Reed's jaw twitched. Jonas stepped forward, hands raised. "Reed, put the gun down. You don't need to—" Reed struck him with the rifle's stock. Jonas fell hard. Snow puffed around him. That moment was the crack Luke had been waiting on. Reed shifted his weight. Ranger lunged. The dog exploded through the snow in a blur of grey and black, hitting Reed full in the side before the man could fire. The rifle discharged into the air, a deafening boom swallowed by the storm. Reed crashed backward, Ranger on top of him, teeth snapping inches from his throat. Luke rushed in, knocking the rifle away with a kick, then slammed Reed's wrist into the ground until the weapon slipped from his grasp. Reed howled, trying to shove Ranger off, but the shepherd held firm, growling so deep the ground seemed to vibrate. "Stop him!" Jonas croaked, struggling to sit up. "Don't kill him!" Luke tightened his grip on Reed's coat. The man's face twisted with rage and panic. "Where is she?" Reed spat blood into the snow. "Inside. Tied up in the corner. She's fine. Thought she'd fetch a good price. Idiot girl wouldn't stop screaming." Ranger growled louder, leaning his weight into Reed's chest. One more inch, and the dog would clamp down for good. Luke's hand hovered over Ranger's collar, steady but conflicted. Jonas pulled himself up, limping towards them. "Let me help you get her out. Let me fix what I did." Luke finally met his eyes. "And what if this is another lie?" Jonas shook his head hard. "If Reed wanted her alive, she's alive. That's the only truth he keeps." Behind them, the faint voice returned. "Hello, is someone there?" "Emily." Luke's pulse kicked into high gear. He grabbed Reed by the coat and shoved him face down into the snow, tying his wrists with the rope Jonas had dropped. Ranger didn't back away until Luke touched his shoulder. "Inside. Now." Jonas nodded once, shame thick in his eyes, and hurried to the cabin door. He fumbled with the lock, then forced it open. Heat washed out in a wave, thick and stale. Emily lay inside, tied at the wrists, eyes sunken but alive. When she saw Luke, her breath hitched. "Please, please don't leave me here." Ranger pushed past Luke, burying his cold nose into her cheek, whining softly in recognition. Emily broke into tears, clutching his fur with trembling hands. Jonas stood in the doorway, head bowed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I am so damn sorry." Luke didn't say forgiveness. He didn't say judgment. He cut the ropes and lifted Emily gently, her weight fragile in his arms. Behind him, Reed screamed from the snow. "You're all dead. When this storm clears, I'll—" Ranger turned towards the door, teeth bared, and Reed's voice choked off. Luke pulled Emily close, carrying her into the warm cabin while wind howled outside. They weren't safe yet, but for the first time since the stone hut, there was a chance. The storm only grew harsher after they freed Emily from the cabin. The wind cut sideways across the foothills, a savage force that erased footprints as soon as they were made. Luke pulled Emily's arm over his shoulder, feeling how light she was, how cold. Jonas followed close behind, limping heavily, one arm clutched to his ribs. Ranger stayed at Luke's right side, pacing low, ears flat, every sense fired up. Reed wasn't far. They had tied him. They had left him face down in the snow. But men like Reed didn't stay down long, and Luke knew it. He could feel the storm shifting, could feel something predatory moving in it. Emily stumbled on a rock hidden under the drift. Luke steadied her. "You all right?" She nodded weakly. Just don't let me go again. You're not going anywhere, he said. Ranger pressed against her hip, guiding her through the blowing snow. She reached down and brushed his fur with shaking fingers. That simple touch made Ranger's tail lift once, just a soft sway, but enough to reassure her that she wasn't alone. They reached the edge of a narrow ravine. Jonas pointed across it. There's another cabin ruin up that way. If we can get higher, your fire might show through the storm. Luke scanned the sky. No stars, no moon. Just a faint swirl of pale silver trying to break through the clouds. It was their only chance. He nodded. Let's move. They crossed the ravine carefully, working step by step. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Jonas stumbled twice from pain. Ranger kept darting ahead, checking the path, then returning to press against Luke's leg as if pushing him onward. Halfway across the ridge, a gunshot cracked through the storm. Emily screamed. Snow blew upward in a white burst near Luke's boot. The echo bounced off the stone walls of the ravine. Reed, free, armed. Luke spun and shoved Emily behind him. Ranger reacted faster. He launched himself toward Luke, body twisting mid-air just as the second shot fired. The bullet struck Ranger's shoulder, tearing through fur and muscle. Ranger yelped, a raw, broken sound Luke had never heard from him. No. Luke fell to his knees, pulling Ranger toward him, hands shaking as he searched for the wound. Blood spread quickly across the dog's winter coat, dark against grey. Ranger looked up at him with alert, determined eyes. No panic, no fear, only urgency. The dog pushed his head against Luke's arm, urging him to move. I know, buddy. I know. Luke whispered hoarsely. They weren't safe. Reed appeared at the top of the ravine, rifle raised, silhouetted against the faint silver sky like a spectre born from the blizzard. You think you're taking her from me? He shouted, voice rough and wild. You think a cowboy and a dog can outrun me? Jonas stepped in front of Emily, his entire body trembling, not with fear this time, but with resolve. His voice cracked through the storm. This ends tonight, Reed. Reed snarled. You're nothing but the bait I dragged in? Jonas didn't flinch this time. Maybe once. Not anymore. Reed cocked the rifle. Jonas moved first. He lunged, ramming his shoulder into Reed's stomach. The impact shocked all three of them, sending Reed backward. The rifle fired wildly into the air as both men tumbled across the icy ground. Luke pulled Ranger up, supporting the injured dog's weight. Stay with me, boy. You've got this. Ranger leaned heavy but stayed on his paws. Jonas and Reed crashed towards the edge of the ravine. Snow rolled off the cliffside, lost into darkness. Jonas dug his heels into the ice, trying to force Reed away from the others. Reed fought back viciously, slamming an elbow into Jonas's jaw. Jonas staggered, but didn't let go. Luke searched for his dropped knife, but found only rocks and wind. He turned toward Emily. Run when I say. Ranger growled low, pushing forward despite the wound, ready to protect again even if it meant bleeding out on the slope. Jonas's boot slipped. Reed seized the moment, getting leverage on his rifle, swinging it to aim. Luke shouted, Jonas! Jonas didn't hesitate. He threw his full weight sideways, slamming into Reed's chest before the man could fire. The force sent both of them sliding toward the cliff. Reed's scream tore through the blizzard as the snow gave way beneath him. He tumbled downward, disappearing into a dark gap between the rocks. The sound of his body hitting the lower ledge echoed hollowly. Jonas slid as well, grabbing for anything he could hold. His fingers caught a jagged root sticking out of the rock wall. He dangled there, body shaking violently from the strain. Luke rushed toward him. Hold on! Jonas's voice cracked. Get Emily out of here. Please, just get her out. Luke ignored the plea. He reached down, grabbing Jonas's wrist with both hands. The wind tore at them, trying to peel them apart. But Luke had pulled calves from frozen creeks, and men from barbed wire in worse storms. He grit his teeth and hauled Jonas upward, inch by inch, until Jonas rolled onto solid ground. Jonas lay on his back, gasping, staring at the sky. I thought that was it. Luke shook his head. Not tonight. Emily ran to them, tears frozen on her cheeks. You saved him. Jonas blinked, stunned. I didn't think I'd ever save anyone again. Ranger nudged Jonas's arm with his nose, as if granting him a brief, solemn recognition. Jonas let out a shaky breath. Luke turned his eyes skyward. The clouds thinned, revealing a faint glow of moonlight. Now. He rushed to a clearing of packed snow, tearing open his emergency bag. Ranger lay beside him, panting hard but alert. Luke dragged branches into a pile, hands moving faster than they ever had in his life. He struck the flint once, twice. The third spark caught. A flame rose, small but fierce, its glow curling upward through the wind. Emily gripped Luke's sleeve. Do you think they'll see it? Luke stared at the sky, heart pounding. If anyone's out there, they will. Minutes stretched like hours. Then Ranger's ears perked, sharp, high, listening. A faint thump-thump broke through the storm. Emily gasped. That's a chopper. Luke lifted Ranger's chin gently. Hear that, boy? They're coming. A bright searchlight cut through the clouds. The helicopter descended slowly, buffeted by the storm, but steady, controlled. The spotlight hit their fire, then swept onto them. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. This is Wyoming Search and Rescue. Stay where you are. Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing in relief. Jonas lowered his head into his hands, tears lost in the snow. Luke kept his arm around Ranger as rescuers rushed toward them. He wasn't used to being seen, or thanked, or called a hero. But when Emily hugged him and whispered, "You saved my life," Luke didn't look away this time. He rested his hand on Ranger's neck, feeling the dog's heartbeat, steady and strong, despite the blood matting his shoulder. Luke looked toward the ravine where Reed had fallen, then toward Jonas, broken, repentant, and still alive. Justice had found its way through the storm, and Ranger, wounded but unbroken, had carried them all to it. The wind over the Wyoming plains was gentler now, not warm, not soft, but no longer the vicious, tearing force that had once tried to bury them. A month had passed since the night Luke Marston thought he might die on a mountainside, a month since Ranger had taken a bullet meant for him, a month since Emily's faint voice whispered against the snow, begging not to be left behind. Life didn't snap back into place. It settled, slowly, quietly. Ranger's wound healed better than the vet expected. The bullet had passed clean through the muscle, missing bone. For the first 2 weeks, the shepherd moved with a stiff limp, but he fought the restriction like a creature who refused to be anything less than whole. Luke slept beside him every night on the living room floor, waking at the smallest shift of Ranger's breath. The dog hated the cone. Luke took it off early, knowing Ranger understood the stakes. The dog never licked the wound. By week 3, Ranger was trotting again. By week 4, he was running, tail high, ears sharp, the cold wind combing through his thick coat. Luke loaded Emily's suitcase into the back of his truck a few days later. Her cabin near the base of Elk Ridge had been repaired after the storm. Broken shutter fixed, roof patched, chimney cleared. She stood in front of it now, wearing a wool coat and gloves that were too thin for Wyoming spring, smiling at Luke like she still couldn't quite believe the world was real again. "Thank you for bringing me home," she said. Ranger nudged her leg, tail wagging softly. Emily crouched, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. He leaned into her, patient and warm. "You two saved me," she whispered into his fur. Luke rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say. Gratitude still made him uneasy. Praise made him even more so. Just did what anybody would have done, he muttered. Emily stood, brushing snow from her gloves. No, Luke, you did what most people wouldn't. You went back into the storm. He didn't answer. He wasn't good at taking credit. But Ranger gave her hand a gentle lick, as if accepting the gratitude on both their behalf. Emily looked at him again, softer this time. The kind of look that didn't ask for anything, just acknowledged him, really saw him. Will you come by sometime? She asked quietly. Not for anything big, just coffee, dinner, a break from cows? Luke almost smiled. Almost. We'll see, he said. The words weren't a refusal. They weren't a promise either. But they came with something he hadn't offered anyone since his brother's funeral years ago. A chance. Emily nodded. She didn't push. She just waved as he climbed back into the truck, Ranger hopping into the passenger seat, settling against Luke's shoulder like he had the night of the blizzard. On the drive home, Luke looked at the mountains framed in the windshield. Snow still clung to the ridges, brushing the peaks with white. The land was wide, endless, quiet in a way that made most people feel small. But not Luke. This land had held his grief, his guilt, and now, somehow, his healing. He turned into his ranch gate, the old wooden sign creaking on its chain. The cattle were grouped near the fence line, slow-moving shadows in the late afternoon light. Ranger stood up in the truck bed, tail swishing, surveying everything like a king returning to his territory. Back home, Luke said softly. Ranger woofed once, approving. Luke parked near the barn and stepped out, stretching his stiff shoulders. Ranger jumped down beside him, no limp left in his stride. They walked together toward the pasture. The sky glowed pale gold, winter light softening into evening. Luke leaned against the fence, breathing in the silence. But it wasn't the old kind of silence, the suffocating weight he once used to punish himself with. This silence felt open, roomy, like space he could walk into instead of hide inside. He remembered the girl's journal from the stone hut, the carved SOS, the blood trail, the terror in her writing, and he remembered the exact moment Ranger lunged between him and Reed's bullet. Ranger had chosen him without hesitation, a man who once believed he didn't deserve to be saved. Luke felt the sting behind his eyes before he could stop it. He blinked hard and rested a hand on Ranger's head. The shepherd pressed close, leaning his full weight against Luke's leg. "You kept me alive," he said quietly, again. Ranger looked up at him, amber eyes calm and steady, as if saying, "That's my job," as if saying, "You don't have to carry everything alone." Luke sat in the cold grass, knees drawn up, letting Ranger settle beside him. The sun dropped lower, smearing the sky with streaks of silver. He thought of Emily's trembling smile when she stepped onto solid ground for the first time after the rescue. He thought of Jonas, limping, battered, but trying to make things right. He thought of the way the search and rescue team had shouted his name, calling him brave, calling him a hero. A word he'd spent years running from. Now, in the quiet of his ranch, it didn't feel like a burden anymore. Luke exhaled long and slow. For the first time since his brother's death, the guilt loosened its grip. The old memory of searching too late, of failing, no longer owned him completely. Because that night on the mountain, he had chosen differently. He had chosen to go back, chosen to fight, chosen to save someone he didn't even know. The wind carried a few snow flurries across the field. Ranger lifted his head, watching them dance. Luke placed a hand on the dog's chest, feeling the steady drum of his heartbeat. "We did good," he whispered. Ranger leaned in, closing his eyes. The plains were quiet. Not the quiet of loneliness, the quiet of beginning again. The storm had long since melted into memory. But the stone hut still stood exactly as Luke remembered it, cold, small, and quietly honest. Its walls held no warmth, yet something about returning felt necessary, like unfinished business settling into place. A month after her rescue, Emily asked to go back. Not to relive the fear, she said, but to reclaim the space where she refused to die. Luke agreed, though the idea twisted something in his chest. Ranger sat in the truck bed as they drove up the ridge, ears forward, posture alert, as if he, too, sensed the gravity of coming full circle. When they reached the clearing, snow crunched under their boots. A thin line of frost clung to the hut's stones. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and the kind of stillness only high country terrain could hold. Emily carried a small wooden plaque wrapped in an old cloth. Her hands shook, but not from cold. Luke gently took it from her, feeling the weight of what she had carved, for the ones who were found, and the ones who still wait. Ranger walked ahead of them, nose close to the ground, then lifted his head as if recognizing the place. Not with fear, with memory, with duty. He approached the hut's entrance and sat, waiting for them, gaze steady. Inside, the walls still held the scrape marks, the faint stains on the stone floor, the hollow echo of a girl calling for help with no guarantee anyone would ever hear her. Emily stood in the center of the room, her breath catching. This was where she had carved the SOS, hands numb, lungs burning, hours sliding into days. She touched the faded lines with her fingertips. "I thought nobody would ever find me here," she whispered. Luke looked at Ranger. He was already watching Emily, tail barely swaying, as if understanding the weight of her words, because he had heard what no one else could, smelled what the storm tried to hide. "Ranger saved you," Luke said quietly. "I just followed him." Emily smiled, tears gathering but not falling. That's what makes it so incredible. He trusted something inside him enough to act on it. Luke crouched to scratch behind Ranger's ears. "You always did know more than you let on, huh, buddy?" Ranger pressed his head into Luke's palm, eyes soft but alert, as if acknowledging the truth of it. Together they stepped outside to place the plaque. Luke found a flat stone and cleared the frost from it. Emily set the plaque down with both hands. Ranger sat beside her, posture tall, almost ceremonial. For a moment the three of them stood in silence, letting the cold air settle around them. Emily spoke first. "I want people to know this place wasn't just where something terrible happened. It's where something good did, too." Luke nodded slowly. "Maybe it can be both." She looked at him, understanding without needing more words. After they finished, they started back towards the truck. But midway across the ridge, Ranger stopped. His ears twitched, nose lifting. Luke tensed automatically. Memories of Reed, of snow cracking underfoot, of gunshots slicing the air, everything hit at once. "What is it?" Luke asked. Ranger took 3 slow steps forward, nose tracking something faint on the wind. Then he circled back, brushing Luke's leg. His tail wagged once, low and confident. Luke exhaled. Not danger, something else. A reminder maybe that Ranger was still listening, still guarding. Emily watched the dog with a soft smile. He still checks the world like it might break any second. Luke shook his head. No, he checks the world like he's ready to fix it. That made her laugh, quiet and warm, carried away by the wind. Back at the ranch, the legacy of the storm took on a different shape. Luke had reopened the old horse barn on the east side of his property. For years, he couldn't bring himself to touch it. It was where he and his brother used to break colts in the summer. The dust carried too many echoes. But things shifted after the rescue. Luke swept out the hayloft, patched the roof, installed a wood stove. He hung a sign above the door. Marston's safe haven for anyone caught out in the storms. Cowboys, hikers, drifters, teenagers who underestimated Wyoming weather. Anyone. He stocked it with blankets, water, first aid supplies, and a radio. Emily donated a generator. Jonas, who was slowly finding his footing again, brought in extra firewood every week. People in town started calling it the Haven Barn, and Ranger became its heartbeat. Whenever Luke opened the doors in the morning, Ranger was the first to walk through, inspecting every corner as if it were his duty. Which, Luke figured, it was. Ranger's story spread faster than Luke ever expected. Folks from the valley came by just to see him. Kids asked to take pictures with the shepherd who had followed instinct into a blizzard and saved a woman's life. One afternoon, a reporter from Cheyenne came to document the rescue. Ranger sat beside Luke during the interview, chest proud, posture regal. The reporter crouched down, smiling. Is it true he found the trail when nobody else could? Luke nodded. He heard something no human could. Maybe smelled it. Maybe sensed it. But he didn't stop until he got us to her. The reporter's eyes softened. Some might say he's got a gift. Ranger glanced at Luke, then nuzzled his arm. Luke let out a quiet breath. Not a gift, he said. A calling. When the interview aired, something unexpected happened. Donations started arriving at the Haven Barn. A group of search and rescue volunteers asked if Luke would help train their new K-9 unit. A high school girl who'd heard Emily's story left a note at Luke's gate. Thank you for reminding us that people still do good things. Luke tucked it into the barn wall, between two beams. A reminder of why he opened the doors at all. The more people Luke met, the more he realized something simple. The storm had changed them. All of them. Emily reclaimed her life. Jonas chose to be better. Luke forgave himself. And Ranger, Ranger became something bigger than just a partner. He became a symbol. Not of heroism in the flashy sense, but of instinct, of loyalty, of the quiet courage to follow a whisper in the wind, even when the world is trying to drown it out. One evening, as sunset spread bronze light across the plains, Emily stopped by the ranch again. Ranger ran to greet her, tail sweeping snow off the ground. She looked at Luke, eyes bright. The plaque is already getting snowed on. It looks perfect there. Luke nodded. Good. That's where it belongs. Emily hesitated, then asked softly, Do you think people will understand the message? Luke leaned on the fence, watching Ranger chase a drifting tumble of frost. Maybe, maybe not, but someone out there will need it. And when they see it, they'll know exactly what it means. Emily smiled at that. She didn't need further explanation. The storm was over, but the legacy it left behind was just beginning. The local news van rumbled up Luke Marston's dirt road on a soft spring afternoon, the kind where the Wyoming wind finally loosened its winter bite. The plains stretched wide and quiet, touched by gold light. The Haven Barn stood in the distance, doors open, a thin curl of smoke rising from its stove. And Ranger lay beside Luke on the porch, head lifted, ears pricked, already aware visitors were coming long before their engine came into earshot. Luke watched the dust cloud approach. He'd agreed to this interview reluctantly. Emily had insisted it was important. Jonas had said the story could save a life one day. Luke wasn't so sure. But Ranger didn't mind attention. He stood the moment the van parked, tail rising, posture alert with quiet confidence. Two reporters stepped out. They carried notebooks, a camera, and the kind of polite excitement people get when meeting. Something legendary. You must be Luke Marston. Luke nodded once. That's me. And this must be Ranger. The cameraman lowered slightly, as if meeting royalty. Ranger didn't puff up or pose. He simply watched them with calm, amber eyes, taking their measure. The interview gear was set up on the porch. Luke sat on the top step. Ranger settled beside him, shoulder pressed against Luke's jeans, warm and grounding. The reporter clipped a mic to Luke's shirt. "We just want you to tell it in your own words. No pressure." Luke huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Words weren't his craft. He shaped horses, cattle, fences. Ranger shaped the rest. The camera light blinked red. "We're rolling," the cameraman whispered. The reporter leaned in slightly. "Luke, thank you for talking with us. Folks all over Wyoming have heard the story, but everyone keeps asking the same question." She paused, then delivered it gently. "How did you even know someone was out there that night in the blizzard?" Luke looked down at Ranger. The shepherd looked back, eyes steady, unblinking, loyal as the earth beneath them. Luke placed his hand on Ranger's head. "I didn't." Ranger's ear flicked at the sound of his own name. Luke continued. "He did. He heard something no human could hear in that wind. Fear, hope, a heartbeat on the edge of giving up. I just followed him." The reporter nodded slowly, almost reverently. "So you're saying Ranger saved her life?" Luke shook his head. "No. He saved all of us in one way or another." The cameraman zoomed in on Ranger. The dog didn't flinch. He sat tall, chest rising and falling with calm certainty. His presence filled the frame with quiet strength, the kind that doesn't ask for recognition but carries it anyway. Luke spoke again, voice low, the kind of tone a man used when telling the truth he'd carried too long. "There's a moment out there in the cold when you think everything's done, when you think the world already gave up on you. But then this dog, he pushes his head into your hand. He drags you forward. He refuses to let you quit." The reporter smiled softly. "Sounds like he saved you too." "Maybe he did," Luke said. "Maybe he does every day." As the interview wound down, the sky shifted. Clouds drifted overhead, turning the sunlight silver. Ranger lifted his head toward something only he sensed. A distant noise, a change in wind, or maybe just habit. Luke followed his gaze. Nothing but horizon. Still, Luke felt it. That instinct, that tether between a man and the one creature who had chosen to stay. The reporter gathered her notes. "Before we wrap, is there anything you want to say to the folks who've been following your story?" Luke looked straight into the camera. His voice was steady, shaped by the land that raised him, quiet but sure. What happened in that storm wasn't luck. It wasn't skill. It was trust. He rested his hand on Ranger's neck. Trust in him. Trust in something bigger than fear. And if you've ever had an animal choose you, really choose you, you know exactly what I mean. Ranger leaned into him, eyes soft but proud. Luke's next words came easier than he expected. "And maybe you've got your own story." A moment when a loyal pet changed everything without saying a word. He looked deeper into the lens, speaking not to the camera now, but to every living room, every kitchen table, every person watching from somewhere far away. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Silence washed over the porch. Not empty silence. Meaningful silence. Ranger's tail brushed the wood once, steady and sure. The cameraman lowered the lens, almost reluctant to break the moment. "Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Ranger." Ranger stood, stretched once, then trotted toward the open field as if leading them out of the moment the same way he had led Luke through the storm. Luke watched him go, warmth spreading through his chest. The reporter packed up her gear. Before leaving, she turned back. "People are going to love this. Some might even look at their dogs differently tonight." Luke smiled, small but real. They should. When the van drove off down the dirt road, Luke walked into the field, hands in his pockets, hat low against the glow of the afternoon. Ranger raced back to him, looping around his legs before stopping at his side. "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." They walked together across the open plain, two shadows moving in easy rhythm, a cowboy and his shepherd, a man who once carried too much, a dog who refused to let him fall. Above them, the sky cleared, the wind softened, and somewhere far off, the land waited for the next story to unfold. For now, Luke had only one message left, one he hoped would travel beyond Wyoming, beyond the ranch, beyond the storm that started it all. If you're watching this, support the stories that honor these incredible dogs. Support the ones who listen when the world goes quiet. Support the ones who save us in ways we don't always see. Ranger barked once, sharp and certain, as if agreeing with every word. Luke laughed under his breath. Guess he said it better than me. Together they headed toward the barn, where the light glowed warm and inviting. Their story wasn't finished. It was only opening the door for the next one.